Hello and welcome to another Quaranstream. I am JoeMagician. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic will be adjacent to a couple of my streams, namely the tragedy at Summerhall and the Euron the Eldritch Apocalypse. God, that's so hard to say. Live stream. God, why did you write it that way? Many a fandom have wondered for years if there was some sort of shadowy hand pushing forward these people. And is that hand the pale as weird of Lord Brynden River, also known as the Bloodraven, Red Crow, Last Greenseer, the dude with 1,000 eyes, creepy emo boy, that guy.
1,000 nicknames in one.
1,000 nicknames in one. How many eyes does Bloodraven have after all? The saying goes. Before we get going, and introduce my special guest, who you already can see anyway, please take a second and like and slam all the buttons, the share, the subscribe, all of them. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it can really help with the YouTube algorithm, making sure this gets seen by more people. Yeah, slam them all, like, share, subscribe, all the things. YouTube bots are very fickle. This is what they want. Give them what they want.
1,000 bots in one.
Yeah. And joining me today, I would say, is the #1 Bloodraven fan, although that was disputed on Twitter. A man who has co-produced 6+ hours, maybe 7 hours of content about Bloodraven. We have the lovely, talented Aziz of the History of Westeros podcast. Welcome, Aziz.
Well, I'm not so sure about being lovely, especially if, given what's going on.
Don't show the hand.
Yeah, I could just real fast. Like,
oh God.
I'm rotting. Yes. So, yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. This is great. I do love talking Bloodraven, and he is a lot of fun. And let me shout out our friend Pat Doherty, who this is actually an anti-Bloodraven shirt. So I'm some sort of traitor here. It says Bloodraven shot first, but it's all in good fun, right? It's so what if he shot first? He had a right to shoot first. He's the he's the master of whisperers and King's Hand and all that, Lord Commander, and like you said, 1,000 nicknames.
He's all the things.
So yeah, he's a super fascinating character, really amazing and unique. And the reason we produce so much content on him is he's been around so long. He's got a full life that's really interesting from a political perspective, like taking out all the magic. His life is super fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a political figure, hand of the king for 2 different kings, and master whispers for another. Just so much time during a really peak era, and it's so cool that he's has all this magic associated with him, despite living during the lowest magic era of the Targaryen, 300 years of Targaryen rule. So there's conundrums, there's cool stuff, there's lots of character, interesting stuff. He's not just a supernatural being. He's got personality that's also really compelling, and a personality story that's really interesting. So, like, I mean, obviously, I'm already just spewing all sorts of stuff.
We're only in the intro. Aziz has done an essay already.
That goes to show how much there is to say about this character. I can't even control myself.
There's just too much passion there. And of course, you have your Valor Arita stream and these Crusader Kings 2 streams, which both of us are doing nowadays.
Yeah, high five. This is fun, right?
Yeah. In my game, Bloodraven is dead after having both his eyes taken out, but yours had quite a successful life.
He did. He was only recently passed. He's probably in his late 60s, and in that stream, Daemon Blackfyre is the God Emperor of Essos and Westeros. So it's a little different than canon Westeros, but hey, that's what games you can do crazy stuff like that.
It's some fun fan fiction.
Yeah,
we're playing.
Exactly.
And also, after this stream, today's a busy day for me. At 5 p.m., I'll be live on Radio Westeros on their second stream. Aziz, you were there last week talking about Jon Snow. This week, fun. I'll be talking about Melisandre.
A related topic, yes.
Unbelievably, Radio Westeros is doing related topics, ones that feed into each other. I never would have expected that from them with their amazing amount of pre.
Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I was expecting them to do something about the Russian Navy next, but you never know. Yeah. Also tonight at 8 o'clock after your stream, we're hosting Quiplash over on History of Westeros channel. It's a benefit for Ice and Fire Con because they're a nonprofit, and like a lot of people, the moving and conventions are not doing great right now.
Nope.
But so we're trying to help them out a little bit, but mostly it's just going to be fun. Quiplash is kind of like Mad Libs, but it's a Song of Ice and Fire Quiplash. Shiera wrote questions that are Song of Ice and Fire themed, and anyone can participate. If you have a browser, you can log in and vote on answers. So anyone can play, and we've got a bunch of podcasters ready to go for giving answers.
I hope somebody plays as Dancing Sean to keep my tradition going from Con of Thrones in Dallas.
Well, I'm sure he'll be there.
Yeah, but it's important that somebody else is as Dancing Sean.
That's a good point. We'll see if I can get someone to do that. Maybe we'll get Chloe to do that.
There we go. Oh, I'm sure she would love it. As playing as Dancing Sean, Chloe. So all that out of the way. To begin with, we have a quote here from old Brynden Rivers himself, actually talking about himself, which is kind of a rarity. When we see him in A Song of Ice and Fire, and when we see him as Maynard Plum, spoiler alert, he is Maynard Plum from the Mystery Knight, he rarely talks about himself. He's always giving exposition, or he's helping Bran, or he's talking about some sort of deep lore thing, but very rarely is he speaking about how he feels about things. And this is one of those ones, and it's a very, very telling one. Please, you want to give it a read?
He heard a whisper on the wind, a rustling amongst the leaves. You cannot speak to him, try as you might. I know. I have my own ghosts, Bran. A brother that I loved, a brother that I hated, a woman I desired. Through the trees I see them still, but no word of mine has ever reached them. The past remains the past. We can learn from it, but we cannot change it.
There is something pretty special about George's writing, that he can make us feel sympathetic for someone that can be as cruel and cold as Brynden Rivers. He's very much the ends justify the means. He will do anything to win. And even in this quote, it pulls at your heartstrings a little bit. It's like, even for him, somebody that is arguably maybe one of the worst moral people in A Song of Ice and Fire, you're like, wow, that must hurt you personally to live with. It's interesting to think about that. This is how Bloodraven defines his own life. Ghosts of his siblings, all the people. How many times did he watch wondering if he did the right thing as his younger self's arrows cut through Blackfyre and his sons? Or replay the last time he spoke to his beloved Shiera, trying to understand what went wrong with their. And I think with that in mind, let's cast backwards, because a lot of people like talking about Bloodraven now. The dude in the tree, one staring out from Melisandre's visions, the Thousand Eyes in One. And let's just go back to when he was just Brynden, when he was just the son of Melissa Blackwood. Please take it away.
Yeah, well, born a few years after Bittersteel and Daemon Blackfyre, so he was just younger enough that you would think that, excuse me, that when they're training, like young boys training together, that he would have been just outside their age group, that he might have been excluded, especially if he was a little smaller and scrawnier, while Bittersteel and Daemon were older and bigger. So I wonder if that's where it all started, where he was a little bit left out, if there was rivalries from the get-go when they were just little kids. And this is just like you're saying, that's immediately another thing you could feel sympathy for. This kid just kind of left out of what the older kids are doing. I mean, that's very we feel sympathetic for, because it's a realistic thing that, even though this is a fantasy realm, that's something that could happen in the real world really easily. And of course, that right away, there's the Blackwood-Bracken rivalry with those two from a young age. And he had sisters that we don't know anything about. It's possible he wasn't raised with them, even though they have the same mother, but there's just very little said about them. It's also kind of hard to say how much time he spent at court early in life, and how much, whether he lived at Raventree Hall for a spell, or a span, rather. A spell. We got to be careful with that word. And so he was raised. The very early years are a little hard to figure for sure where he was, but there's not a whole lot of difference. We know that he came to court at some point and spent a lot of time there, most of his life perhaps, and that his mother was really popular. And that's an interesting point, because the Blackwood Bracken rivalry played out, you know, a lot when he was a kid over who the king's favorite was, with the whole deal with the his mistresses, and how it went Bracken, then Blackwood, and then back to Bracken. So there was just all this. Geez,
it's like
wow.
It's just trying. I think outsiders. Like a blood. No sound.
Oh shoot, yeah, I see that. Oh,
Nothing's. Oh, I think I know. I put on some filter settings. All right, guys, how's this going? I'm just gonna talk about Aziz for a minute. You know, Aziz has a really weird hand going on at the moment. It's kind of creepy. He showed it to me.
People are saying better.
They're saying better. Yeah, I think the problem was the noise gate. I put the noise gate too high.
Oh.
So it's supposed to cut out the background noise and my breathing. Okay. So everyone's saying this is better? Okay. So we can go back to that. I can just cut this out when I do the audio for the podcast.
Okay.
So like I was saying, I think there's quite a lot we can see between Bloodraven and Jon Snow and Theon and the relationship to Robb Stark and Winterfell. The way they feel like outsiders, even like the physical differences between them. Like Jon feels it very strongly that he looks like he should be a Stark and Robb does not. Robb has that Riverlander Tully look to him.
Yeah.
And with Bloodraven, that's even more extreme. Where, I mean, he doesn't look like a Targaryen.
He doesn't look like anything.
He doesn't look like anything. He's unique, and Theon feels the same thing. And especially when you look at Tyrion, Tyrion might be the best comp for how he probably felt in court. Where, you know, Tyrion's a dwarf. Bloodraven is obviously not. He is tall and skinny, but he's not. He's albino, which is people are prejudiced against. He has the red eyes. He's got this weird birthmark on his face. Like, he has to, even though he was Aegon's son, even though he's a great bastard, there's no way he didn't feel like an outsider his entire life. And that has to influence where he's going. And since George loves talking about outsiders, loves talking about broken bastards and like bastards, broken things, I forget the third one, but you know, there may be no bigger example than Bloodraven. And on top of that, he's an old god worshiper in King's Landing. He's there worshiping the old gods with Melissa. Everything about him sets him apart from the rest of the court.
Yeah, the old gods part makes me think a little bit of Sansa, of all people, because she was herself like a lonely old gods worshiper amongst amongst King's Landing, although she also worshipped the Seven. Decent chance Bloodraven did too, because he was also cross-cultural, and maybe he, you know, went to church from time to time and said the words. He may not have believed in it very much, but you know, I wonder about that. I wonder how much he just said, screw it, no one likes me, I'm going to lean into this, like Tyrion did. Just like, I totally agree with you. He's a perfect comp, because even though Tyrion wasn't hand for very long and Bloodraven was hand for a long time, it's a similar enough point that while Tyrion was hand, he got blamed for a lot of things that weren't his fault, or because people were just apt to do that because of his appearance and his reputation. And of course, his reputation wasn't terribly deserved, because it also is based a lot in his appearance. And that's, you know, a double whammy of not deserving it. But like Tyrion, or like Bloodraven, whoever perspective you want to root this in, they accepted this. They're like, well, that's never going to change. Like Tyrion, that's one of the things we learn about Tyrion, is he's telling Jon Snow, accept what you are. The world's not going to forget it. And Bloodraven's not going to have any illusions about that either. He's like, well, what's going to happen? Am I going to cease to be a red-eyed albino? It's like that. Let's see. That's never going to. Well, actually, I guess it kind of ceased to happen when he was really old. But
he becomes like a skeleton at that point. And I have the quote here. It says, "Let me give you some counsel, bastard." Lannister said, "Never forget what you are for the world, for surely the world will not. make it your strength. Then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it. It'll never be used to hurt you. You have to imagine Bloodraven was telling himself that from when he was very young. And kids were probably picking on him, especially the other great bastards. Like, we'll get into this a little bit later, but Daemon was basically perfect in all the ways that Bloodraven is not. Daeron, too. They were both classically Targaryen, while Bloodraven is everything but. So that has to have worked on him. Oh, and sorry, I missed a super chat. Your last great night with $4.99 says Bloodraven is the reason Aegon the Fifth became king. Oh, thank you very much for the donation. That is something that I think Indie Geek or Robert put out the other day, where he made the case, and I've heard this theory before, that that Bloodraven for some reason was angling to get Aegon on the Iron Throne, especially after he married Beth of Blackwood. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It's one of those things that's hard to say. Is it Bloodraven or is it an accident? Because like we were talking about, he gets blamed for everything. Is he actually behind everything? Was he behind the Great Spring Sickness? No, but he did get blamed for that. A lot of Targaryens died. Is that his fault? Some of them definitely probably are, but I don't know.
Yeah, he may have been a victim of some timing on some of that. Yeah, it looks bad when the king and his heirs die, and it's precisely them and no one else.
And it works out exactly for you.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I don't know, Bloodraven. Maybe that one. I mean, you can blame him for the Blackfyres when he chopped off all their heads and shot them through arrows, but I would be interested to know what his role in exactly was with shaping Targaryen dynasty, especially like when it came to making sure Aegon never made it to the throne. I can see him doing that.
I have strong feelings about that one as well. I mean, the guy drank wildfire, and while he was drunk, and I have a little bit of headcanon that someone encouraged him in this. He's like, he's drunk, he's crazy. Let's see, I don't know, maybe we can get him to drink wildfire.
Maybe Maynard Plum showed up again and they were having a great time carousing.
Just egged him on. Get it?
Egged him. Oh, Aziz with the yolks.
Damn it.
And one thing about his childhood growing up is, I mean, obviously he got dispossessed. This was sort of a running theme throughout Aegon the Unworthy's life. He would have his favorite wife, but also his favorite kids. I mean, it tended to be Daemon the whole way through, but it sort of changed. Like for a while, Bloodraven was clearly his favorite, and then before that it was Bittersteel, and at some point it might have been Shiera, especially when he was in love with the mother. They seem to be kind of linked, and it's weird to think about the relationship between the Great Bastards and how they relate to each other, in that there must have been some sense of rivalry between them. Like at some point, maybe some of them had like, they accepted it, like, this guy is ridiculous, how are you supposed to please him? And they found like camaraderie in that. Maybe that's what Bittersteel and Daemon had, but there had to have been on some level animosity between them, trying to please Aegon and trying to be the top of the court, basically, behind Daeron.
I think I agree with that, yeah, especially because that was playing out amongst the adults. And so if there's a bunch of kids and they're at court and they're just doing, for the most part, mimicking the adults' behavior, then they're going to grow up. They're growing up amidst a lot of what's likely a lot of infighting, and it's not. It wasn't civil war at that point, but it eventually became that a long time later. And there was a lot of really corrupt and terrible figures surrounding Aegon IV, trying to manipulate him because he was so easily manipulated. You could basically a recurring pattern was give him a new girlfriend and you become Hand of the King. That happened like 3 or 4 times. And it's like, well, like this guy's so the farther it went, the more clear that this pattern became. It's like, boy, this guy is really, you can really get what you want from this king if you just give him some hot girl. And that pattern was like, had to become very clear to even the thinnest of minds. And so there's just a lot of, like you said, this is what they were brought up in. They were brought up amongst a court that was particularly competitive and backstabbish and factionalized. There are just so many these factions that we probably weren't even aware of, because so many of these people that are surrounding Aegon IV were had business interests. For example, they wanted to get him to sign off on certain tax rebates, or maybe adding taxes to certain other things, because they were competing with somebody. Like, you tax my rival for me, and I'm tax free and they're taxed, etc. Just any sort of grift you can imagine was probably happening. Young grift, old grift,
all the grifts.
Yeah. So there's just all that going on, and that's what the kind of world they were brought up in. And then you, like you said, Daemon Blackfyre, then you have this guy you can't be better than him.
Perfect.
Yeah, and even he's even perfect apparently in how he treats other people. I mean, that's probably why Bloodraven loved him. It wasn't because he was so great. It was because he was so great and he treated him well. I think if you're so great and you get treated badly by that person, it hurts more. So I feel like he probably treated him really well. I think that's the thing about Daemon, that he was just so well liked. He was not only an amazing person, but he also like went out of his way to treat people well. That's kind of a headcanon. It's not fully supported, but I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, we'll go into Daemon a little bit later.
Yeah, to me, it's a little bit like, it's not Tywin Lannister, because Tywin's a scumbag, but it's the same kind of thing where Kevin Lannister was like, oh, my brother is so much better than me, so much greater at everything. I'm just going to be his second. I'm just going to sign up and follow him. So I feel like there were probably a lot of people like that surrounding Daemon. And Bloodraven wouldn't have had any of that. He might have been one of the ones following him, but no one was following him at that age. So
it appears that Aegon agreed with you, because not only did some of the great bastards, like I think Bittersteel, got sent home for a while, but Bloodraven not only stayed at court, at least as he got older, he became a valuable member of the court, to the point that, everyone makes a big deal out of Daemon Blackfyre getting the sword Blackfyre, but Bloodraven was given Dark Sister. And there's only 2 Targaryen Valyrian steel blades, and Dark Sister has been held by very important members of court before. Before him was Aemon the Dragon Knight, Daemon the Rogue Prince held it, Visenya. Like, that is a huge, massive honor that sort of gets overshadowed because, it's not the Sword of Kings, but within the Targaryen family, that is a huge deal who has Dark Sister.
That had to be a big moment for him, too, because by then he had to have been, we don't know when he got it, but we know he had it by at least the year 204. He may have already had it during the Blackfyre Rebellion. But Bittersteel didn't get a sword.
Nope, got nothing.
So that might have been like a real moment of satisfaction for him. He's like, I got this, and my brother didn't. And this may have been at a point where Aegor had kept him out of a lot of things. Like that whole, he's 3 years older, much larger. So you can't train. You can't sit with us unless you wear pink, kind of thing. I can imagine Aegor was very a bully, and used his greater size and age to really enforce that. And so this might have been really sad. It's like, you sucked on that, Aegor. I got Dark Sister. Like it could really might have been satisfying.
It must have especially been tough for Aegor, because the things that Aegor was good at, Aegor was obviously the great bastard of favor before Bloodraven. I mean, we're talking about the great bastards. It's Daemon Blackfyre, Aegor Rivers, otherwise known as Bittersteel, Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, and Shiera Seastar. But the things Aegor is good at, Daemon was better at. And not only that, Daemon got the Targaryen look, whereas Aegor did not. He didn't get a sword. He doesn't get to look like a Targaryen.
All he got with the eyes, yeah.
he's like second class. He's not as smart as Bloodraven.
Nope.
He's just like in between, and that must have really driven him crazy in this hyper competitive environment where you can't do anything to Daemon. He's Aegon's favorite, but maybe you can try and bully Bloodraven. He's a weird little guy.
Yeah, and here's something that I think is a little obscure that a lot of people aren't aware of. The Bittersteel for a little while was the number one great bastard, because if you think about it this way, we have to remember that Daemon was not revealed to be Aegon's bastard until he was about 10 or 11 or 12 years old. So before that, the oldest great bastard was Bittersteel, based on what people knew. And at one point, very early on, King Aegon threatened to make one of his great bastards king over Daeron, and it had to be Bittersteel.
Had to be Aegor, yeah.
He was the oldest by far, and it wasn't going to be Bloodraven because of his look and all that, and his age. So that's yet another thing that Aegor is probably bitter over, that, and that his family, whether he's bitter over it or not, his family probably imparted that bitterness, which then he would take out on Bloodraven. So it just feeds that. It's all kind of feeds into that, and whatever. Melissa was a much nicer woman, but she probably at least told stories about the back and forth between the two families, and Bloodraven may have not taken them so sweetly as his mother did.
No, that's probably really true, and it's basically Aegor's life is him eventually losing everything to his other great bastard siblings, and
then almost getting it back and losing it again, right? Yeah. Like they had a resurgence.
Came close. He almost got it back, but then he even married Calla Blackfyre, so he was on his way to even claiming Daemon's Daemon's heritage. But I think a modern day comp I think works really well if you're trying to understand their relationship. I think it's very similar to Littlefinger and Brandon Stark. In particular, the story how Brandon Stark and Littlefinger got into that duel. Brandon cuts them apart. Now, Bloodraven is a much more capable military leader than Littlefinger, but they sort of fit the same kind of archetypes. And Littlefinger afterwards essentially made a vow to himself that he would never fight the way those guys do. He would never try and win on the same battleground. He's going to win his own way. And Littlefinger has used that, and he became, master of coin. He uses economics. He's much more sneaky. And you can see that very much in similar to Bloodraven, whereas there's a million Aegor rivers out there, but there's only one Littlefinger. There's only one Bloodraven. And Nodcast was talking about this on one of their previous episodes, where it makes Littlefinger insanely valuable to the court because there's not that many High Lords that can do these things. These things are normally seen as second class or like middle tier kind of skills. Everyone wants to be Daemon Blackfyre. Nobody wants to be the guy running around just like being the Master of Whispers. And in that way, Bloodraven found this niche that made him more valuable than he ever could. And it probably is very likely related to Bittersteel and Daemon and just finding his own place, much in the same way Littlefinger and Brandon Stark did.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's super rare for the noble families to have people that want to go into that line of work. If you look back at the history of Master of Whispers, there's very few of them are high-born nobles. I mean, Larry Strong is a rare example, and he was had a foot thing, so that's part of his deal. So like someone like Daemon Targaryen, not aka the man Daemon Blackfyre was named for, he's a rare example of someone that would get into that sort of seedy underworld business. But you're right, it's super rare, and that's a great point, because Bloodraven did have those skills, and it made him valuable even while making him hated and a figure of loathing. And it also goes a long way towards explaining how people like Littlefinger and Varys are allowed to live with people like Tywin around. It's like, how did Tywin not kill them off? Well, it's like, well, they're
too valuable. You can't kill them. You can't kill Bloodraven either.
Exactly. And it's the same thing, like it's a similar concept to some of these other characters that are coming along. It's like, that's how Varys was able to survive multiple regimes, is he just keeps making himself useful, even if they don't like him. They don't want to be anything like him or anything like that. It's like, undeniably, he's useful. So
yeah, definitely.
Can't live without that.
And when you think about Ned's reaction to Littlefinger and Stannis' reaction and all these kind of guys that have similarities in sort of upbringing and value systems to maybe someone like Aegon and Daemon, you can see where that animosity will come from. It's so plain. They don't like this type of person. And it's very frustrating for them that they are doing all the things they think they should do as nobles, and yet Bloodraven continues rising higher.
Yeah.
He just continues getting more power. He gets Dark Sister. He even gets Shiera Seastar, which you don't quote unquote get her, but that's how Aegor saw it. And this rivalry just continued, and it's like all the things that Aegor's bullying him for most likely throughout their lives, Bloodraven's turning into a strength. What are you supposed to do about that?
Get really bitter, I suppose.
Be the Bittersteel, yeah.
And he did have, like you said too, it's not just that Bloodraven just started ascending in all these things that he made fun of him for, but it's also the fact that, like we said, Bittersteel was the one ascending, and then his star fell, and then this younger brother that he picked on is the one that rose in his place, not necessarily to be king, but to be as close as you can to the king, and to have all these responsibilities and trust. And you wonder too about the personal angle here. If we're assuming, and I think most of us are on board with the brother he loved being Daemon, well, it's hard to argue against Daemon loving him back if Daemon was that great of a person. And especially if Daemon didn't love him, would Bloodraven really have loved Daemon if Daemon wasn't a fan of him? It's kind of it's a little harder to imagine that. So I wonder too if that was part of, if Bittersteel was also disappointed or even angry or bitter over that relationship, if he thought that Bloodraven wasn't deserving of Daemon's love. Like, who knows how people were possessive of Daemon, but I imagine it was a thing because he was just so great and people loved him so much.
And that's his washboard abs.
Yeah, people like they argue over who they want to be the guy whose his light shines on. When you're that amazing, everybody competes for your attention and affection. So I can really see that being a thing. That they also competed over a man's love without.
I mean, sure. I mean, he lost that over Shiera Seastar, but I mean, that's not the only relationship with value in this court. Obviously, Daemon, especially after Aegon essentially hints that he's going to be the next king, well, then that's the next person to suck up to. And it appears Bittersteel took that to heart and said, well, I lost out on the other ones, but at least I'll beat Bloodraven to Daemon. But probably by relating to him on more of a personal level. They probably shared more interests. They probably shared more values because Bloodraven's such a weird person.
Yeah, and I wonder about his... Do we have a section in here about his relationship with Baelor Breakspear?
We don't. You can do that right now, though, my dude.
Let's talk about that, because obviously the one guy who was maybe a match for Daemon at court was Baelor. He wasn't quite as handsome, but he was very handsome, and he was the real heir rather than a guy that some people thought would make a better king. And he was also super chivalrous and really widely loved. And as we see in the Hedge Knight, like, it was a big, big tragedy when he died. And the realm really, really grieved because he seemed to have earned his position as a beloved figure. And so that's another thing. You wonder how this all plays into it, because a lot of them would have been, maybe it's in factionalism, like the Daemon team versus the Baelor team. They certainly, I really wonder what they were like to each other, how competitive they were with each other, and how that set the tone for everyone else, right? Yeah. If Daemon and Baelor got along, then their squads would get along. But if Daemon and Baelor didn't get along, then their squads would also, be like the what are those gangs in the Jets and the dancing gangs from the...
Oh my God. If you're asking about musicals, it's West Side Story? Is that it?
Yeah, West Side Story, yeah.
How did I know that? Oh God.
I guess you're a secret musicals fan, I guess.
It's out there. It's out there, guys. Apparently I love musicals.
So something like that, where we could, a couple of possibilities where maybe they got along, maybe they were really competitive, because Baelor did notably beat Daemon a couple of times in joust stuff. It did seem like Baelor came out ahead on those, which adds a whole nother angle. You have this whole other faction where there's another really impressive guy that has younger brothers backing him up, and he probably had a lot of Dornishmen on his side as well, for obvious reasons. So yeah, it's just a really big, diverse court full of interesting personalities that we know. Bloodraven would have been too young to have really been a real leader amongst that, especially given his social
stigmas.
Yeah, stigmas is a good way to put it. Like little things that would hold him back in that kind of situation, unfairly, but still it would happen. So it's really fascinating. There's lots of possibilities, and the personalities really, really stand out and give us a lot to work with.
Definitely. And with moving, I think, more towards a modern comp, again, between these characters, because George likes writing in patterns. It seems like the relationship with Bloodraven and Bittersteel may have been something close to the relationship between Jon Snow and Theon, where neither of them are the favorites, but they both have their roles at court, and they both have the things that are marking them apart from the Trueborns. Like, it's one of those things where early on in a Game of Thrones, where there is sort of this weird tension between Jon Snow and Theon, where even though they're on the outside, they're still jockeying for position. And more importantly, they're both jockeying for Robb's friendship. They both struggle to get it.
That's a fantastic parallel, yeah, because Jon, like you said, we already set the stage with Jon and Bloodraven having some things in common. And the bastardy and the Valyrian steel sword and the Night's Watch and like you said, the older brother that everyone loved. I mean, Robb is
perfect.
So very much like Daemon Blackfyre in so many ways. He's like a combo of Daemon, of Robb and Renly, I suppose, because the popularity of Renly is a really big deal, like the usurping his older brother kind of thing. That fits really well, and just how everybody loved him. But Robb fits better as the military, because Renly doesn't have this great reputation as a warrior.
No.
And Robb was maybe less of a hand-to-hand fighter, but his skills as a general are
undisputed, undefeated.
Yeah, I mean, the dude was a prodigy of battlefields and strategy like that. Plus, he had one of the best second-in-commands on his team, which, hey, that's part of what happens when you're a charismatic leader. You attract great people to your team, and that makes your team better. And that's part of what, it's like a snowball effect. The better your team gets with all these people flocking to your banner, the more other people want to come. It's a snowball effect for sure. That's really kind of describes what happened when Robb was crowned. And when Daemon was crowned, it was probably similar because it was very sudden, right? He was arrested almost. We don't quite know how that all went down. Escaped narrowly, and then next thing we know, he's crowned. And a lot of people immediately joined him. It's pretty similar to Robb in that way. So you're right. It's a great parallel.
It may have even been a similar encounter where when Daemon says he's going to crown himself, when Robb does the same, no one's really sure what Theon's going to do. They may have been unsure about Bittersteel too. Like, I mean, he's also an heir. Robb's more popular, but like, there's this tension that they could go their own ways, that Theon could go back to the Iron Islands and become prince again if he wanted to. Like, it's not clear that the loyalty will be there, and yet it ends up being so. Bittersteel joins Daemon Blackfyre, and Theon joins Robb, but then you have Jon and Bloodraven both holding back from joining their popular brothers in rebellion.
Yeah.
For, I would guess, we'll get to it in a little bit with the Daeron section, but probably something more having to do with duty and their feelings towards the realm in general rather than their personal feelings.
Well said.
And then there's, of course, the Blackfyre Rebellions, where we're not going to really go into the details too much here, but I think it's important to note that the Blackfyre Rebellions really stopped becoming about Bloodraven and Daemon and really became Bloodraven versus Bittersteel. The back and forth between them, there's quotes when Bloodraven is posing as Maynard Plum, and we see over and over and over again that it's not just, he is punishing these Blackfyre kids almost as a way to get to Bittersteel. It's like, none of these kids have a chance, but he's really trying to stop Aegor from using them to gain the power that he has gained and to upset the realm's relative peace that happens in between them. I mean, yes, it's mostly assumed, I think, by people that the Blackfyre kids would not have continually invaded if Bittersteel was not shoving Blackfyre into their hands and pushing them across the ocean.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the real heart of the Blackfyre Rebellions beyond the first one. If not the first one also, is Bittersteel, for sure. It's his bitterness that drove so much of it. His iron sense of getting revenge and his just unbreakable determination is really something. It's been born again in characters like John Connington. So I mean, he's the same, coming back after a long exile, leading a Blackfyre candidate in front of the Golden Company. Yeah, that's pretty damn similar.
It's right on the money.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, that's exactly the same thing, minus the grayscale. But yeah, and like you said, it's the politics are incredible here, but if you keep it on the personal side, what must Bloodraven have been thinking here? That's really, like you said, killing the kids to try to get to Aegor is really, really ruthless. But also, you can see, like you said, you could really see the strategy behind it, and it almost worked.
Almost. Very nearly.
Yeah, but like, you got to figure, if Bloodraven liked Daemon, if he loved his brother, then it must have been what was going through his head to kill the man and then kill his two eldest children. I mean, he had to know those kids; those are his nephews. I mean, damn, like what goes through your mind when you're doing that? Like, well, this has to be done. Is it like Stannis, where you just, well, we got to burn this kid? That's the way of it. No, there's no way around it. Got to burn him. Or is it the mind that decides that this is the correct move and can actually go through with it? That's a hard thing to wrap your head around, but we know it exists.
And it's also the escalation in Bloodraven's treatment of the Blackfyres when they start coming over. Like, I think a lot of people forget that there was a point when Bloodraven had Bittersteel in his custody. He was chained and brought before King Aerys for treason. He had him right there. And the same situation we see later with Aenys Blackfyre, where Bloodraven does not hesitate. He lops the kid's head off and challenges the new King Aegon to punish him for it, which Aegon does. But it's really showing this. It's not just a set amount of ruthlessness. It's not a set amount of cruelty that Bloodraven feels towards the Blackfyres and Bittersteel. It is getting worse over time. And this is when he was only in his 60s or his 50s or 60s. We know him these days in his 120, 130s.
I think he's 125 now.
125. Yeah. And like I was talking about with Emmett with Euron Greyjoy a few weeks ago, like this was the starting point. This is like like, him killing Aenys is such a huge emotional and hard thing to do. Like you can, like Daemon Blackfyre was the heat of the battle. There were actually armies. He had to, the killing of execution of Aenys was murder. Like in no uncertain terms.
Like, does he think, what does he think of violating guest right there? I mean, this is a man who's got some sort of closeness with the old gods. It's not clear how much magic he was using by that point, old gods magic, I mean, because he was clearly using glamours, as we see from Peter Plum. But as far as old god stuff, it's not clear how, whether he was skin changing by that point. He probably was. I mean, with Ravens, obviously that seems pretty clear. But whether he had northern sensibilities, whether he believed in guest right as a something that the gods might enforce, I would lean towards no, given that he both was a kinslayer and a violator of guest rights. So, and he doesn't seem to have been punished for it, at least not directly. So
no, it's like a Jon Snow at the end of season 8, where it's like, oh no, he got banished to the Night's Watch. Bummer for Bloodraven. It's probably where he wanted to go anyway.
Yeah, he may have been. I'm not fully sold on him engineering it entirely, but
yes,
wanting to go there is like, there's definitely some potential there for sure. Like the guy was probably having dreams or something. I mean,
maybe a call beyond the wall, like Bran has, something similar to that. We're gonna go to the next section, which is King Daeron the Good. But I just wanted to take a second and say, like, we just hit 200 concurrent viewers.
Yeah,
that's a giant number. Thank you all for showing up. Slam that like button, share, do all the things. We're gonna keep going till about 4. We've got a few more sections, then we'll move on to some questions and stuff like that, because I got a hard timeline with Radio Westeros. Maybe we'll have Aziz back at some point and we'll do more Bloodraven, because clearly neither of us can shut up about the guy.
It never ends. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you all so much for doing that. Slam all the things.
Yeah,
so
hit that button. Faux show.
Yeah, let's move on to King Daeron. I think this is one of the relationships with Bloodraven that I think is the least explored in the fandom. I definitely haven't seen much about it. What do you make of what he thought of King Daeron? Because we look back at that quote, there's only 3 people mentioned, but he has 4 major siblings. So someone's being left out, and most people think it's King Daeron, but it's odd. It's King Daeron he was the most loyal to. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that one thing about Bloodraven that I'm pretty adamant about is that he really does care about the state of the realm. I think he does have some sense of making sure the realm is relatively at peace. I mean, he had some wrong ideas about how to get there. I think he was. I mean, my favorite Bloodraven went too far example is how he's such a hardliner with traitors. He's like, no, if they, treason breeds more treason. He sounds like Joffrey, because if you go fast forward to a Clash of Kings, a Storm of Swords, it's the same conversation where Tywin's like, Joffrey, when your enemies go to their knees, you help them back up. If they defy you, serve them steel and fire. And Joffrey's like, no, traitors are traitors. And I'm like, dude, this is Bloodraven talking right here. Except Bloodraven's obviously vastly more competent than Joffrey. I'm not trying to. It's just on that
like
one
a smidge.
Similar. Even Stannis accepts people kneeling, right? I mean, even Stannis. So if Tywin Lannister, the Castamere guy, is telling you you're going too far with your ruthlessness, it's like, yeah, you might have a point there.
It's pretty something that how far he goes, and also that, like you were saying, like these are horrible things he's doing throughout his life. We see him when he's Maynard Plum, and he's describing the different people that are there at the court, and he's like, well, that guy's father was a traitor, that guy's father was a traitor, obviously they must be too. It's like a long list of, like, you don't forget anything, man. But but beyond that, King Daeron, no punishment for any of these things. It's almost like he treats them like the Mountain, like it's his mad dog on a leash.
Yeah, he's like it's like good cop, bad cop, where Daeron the King wants to be the good, and he's literally Daeron the Good.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets to have the great reputation and all the bad things that happen because, like, anyone who has to carry out something unpleasant under his orders, there's sort of some separation from it. So Bloodraven can kind of take the bad rep, whereas Daeron is the shining, to some people, not a great example of a king because he didn't look like one. But, he wasn't like a big warrior type. But as a leader, as a uniter, he was excellent. And I think that's something Bloodraven believed in, that he saw Daeron's commitment to peace and commitment to changing the realm. Daeron was very big on trying to get the Targaryens away from the incest marriages.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably the second most holy of the kings. Obviously, Baelor was the most holy, the most believer, the biggest believer in the god of the seven. And Daeron very much took after Baelor. They were tight. So that's an important distinction as well. So I think that Brynden was something of a true believer in the concept of making the realm, like sacrificing for the realm, and that the realm mattered more than these smaller scale grievances or individual problems between individual people, rather.
Mm-hmm.
These factions and things like that, those are all small potatoes compared to the health of the realm and peace in the realm. And that's why he was so aggressive against Blackfyres and things like that. I would say he was too aggressive, but I think that was why. I think he believed in Daeron's vision.
Yeah, he believed in his vision, the peace of the realm. I mean, we know where he ends up. That clearly those are when everything else is stripped away, when he's in the tree and he's watching history and trying to fight the true enemy. Those are the things that are motivating him. So
he's still about the realm even after. Yeah, so he serves the realm at the wall. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, very much. I think someone made a great point on Twitter where when Maester Aemon is talking about the man in 10,000, like what would you do with the son in your arms versus your duty, Bloodraven is also one of those figures that would do he does his duty no matter what, and to him it apparently is King Daeron and his kids. It's not just King Daeron. It's he essentially acts as king for King Aerys. He doesn't particularly like Maekar and Egg, but he certainly serves them and helps them. He is not plotting against anybody, and maybe he is. Maybe some of them died, like Aegon, at his hand because he thought they were dangerous, but he takes his service to the Targaryen family, and by extension, the Seven Kingdoms, more seriously than anybody. And that may be just the basis of him and Daeron, that it doesn't seem like there's anything personal between them. There's trust, but personal love, I don't think that's there.
And I'm glad you brought up Maekar, because Maekar is also one of the best examples of this proof, which is that Maekar did not like Bloodraven. Maekar, when Bloodraven was named hand of the king, Maekar ran off like Stannis did.
Yeah.
Maekar is Stannis, basically. So
yeah, basically.
It's like a real family. And he, meaning his own, not the dysfunctional part of his brothers, that fits perfectly. But, he actually had more than one daughter. So it's a perfect. So despite this dislike of him, despite this mistrust of him, he's like, you're my hand, and you're my hand the whole time. And things were under Maekar. I feel like that's something George has been saving, because under Maekar's reign is surprisingly undocumented.
Not a lot there until his death, right?
Right. In between, there's a lot of things we can kind of guesstimate. There's some very interesting events, but there's a lot of just open space where we don't know what happened. We know that there was a really big hot summer. We know there was a plague. We know there was the Peak Rebellion. That's where Maekar died.
Yeah. Goddamn peaks. Always the peaks.
We know that it's during that time that Daeron the Drunkard died, and his wife remarried to well, no, that was the remarrying. The first she had married Valar, and then Valar died, and she married Daeron the Drunkard, and then he died, and then
yeah, bummer about that one. I also think that there's two really good points about maybe the relationship between Daeron and Bloodraven. I think another really good comp, we talked about maybe Tywin and the Mountain, but I think another really good one is Torrhen Stark and Brandon Snow. Particularly the idea that Torrhen, there's the story that Brandon Snow went to him and said, "I will kill Aegon's dragons for you." He went and got the weirwood bows. It's assumed he's the dark-eyed youth in the weirwood vision that Bran has.
I agree. Yeah.
And then you see Bloodraven and Daeron. It looks like Bloodraven did the same thing. He killed 3 dragons for Daeron in Redgrass Field. He killed Daemon and his 2 sons, and it could very much be that kind of relationship where Torrhen is the king who made the great decisions, but he always keeps that character, that Brandon Snow, that mountain next to him, ready to do the dirty work while he keeps his reputation.
That's a great point. That's one that's new to me. I hadn't thought of the Brandon Snow killing 3 dragons versus Bloodraven killing
3 dragons.
Daemon and Aegon. That's really good. Yeah, and certainly the personalities fit pretty well. Torrhen Stark certainly seemed like the type that was his people first before himself. Like, that's a king who gives up his kingdom is very much sending that message. Or he's a coward. I mean, that's also possible.
It could go either way. But
yeah, I mean, I don't lean that way, because the dude did immediately march with all his men south in the first place. Like, I doubt he was just like, I'm going to pretend and then give up at the last minute. But it's possible.
But we also know Daeron never saw the field, so
yeah.
So I think that's kind of a close relationship between them. And then, oh god, what was the other point? I had 2. Shit, what was the second one?
Something about, I see that here. Is that related, or is that something else?
The point about the Raven's Teeth. Can you imagine another king allowing a personal loyalty retinue in their presence belonging to another king other than Tywin Lannister? Nobody else does that. That is a huge amount of trust to allow armed soldiers to guard the Red Keep, loyal to Bloodraven alone.
Yeah, and it's at least 300 of them existed too. And they're not only warriors, they're clearly secret police type, because he would send them out to make arrests and do there's examples of them doing spy things for him. And on the other hand, you can really see why it was needed, because Aegon IV was so corrupt and had given so many positions to people that he had sold. Like, he sold the command of the Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks. He sold these positions for favors. And it was really hard for Daeron to uproot all these corrupt installments. And in order to fight back against these really dirty figures, he had to get dirty with them. And that's what Bloodraven was an expert, I think, at rooting these people out. So if Bloodraven comes along and says, look, I need to form a force to deal with this, they're going to come back at us. Like, these are corrupt, powerful people that do not want to lose their cushy, corrupt positions. So if you're going to take them out, if you're going to remove them from their jobs, they're going to see that coming. They're going to see the writing on the wall and try to stop you before you remove them from their positions and get rid of these cushy back end deals they've got working that they want to hang on to as long as possible. There's real potential for murder and things like that going on with such when you're taking away power from powerful, cruel people. Ruthless people getting power removed you can't just say you're out, you're gone. They will try to get that power back or try to stop you. And that's where I think you can see why the Raven's Teeth were necessary. But once this problem is over, once this phase of reformation is finished, then you've got this oppressive secret police type situation where it's no longer needed, and then they're a problem. And so you wonder if that's part of the whole sending them to the wall was part of that, because a lot of them went with him, and it was like, well, this is a way to kind of get rid of that element as well. So it does get pretty complicated, but you can really see where the conflict lies, and that makes it so compelling, because it's clear where the conflict is. It's just not where all the details are.
And I mean, really, allowing, especially because it's not like Bloodraven is just Littlefinger. It's not like he's Varys. He has a claim on the Iron Throne. You're giving him a personal army in your capital. That's an insane thing to do. But Daeron and Aerys and Maekar clearly thought it was worth it. That Bloodraven and his loyalty were so high that if they had qualms about the Raven's Teeth, they never let them get in the way. That says a lot about his relationship to them. Also, I missed a super chat. Sorry, Lumina M with $2 Canadian, I think. Love this topic and thank you so much for the super chat. Yeah, great. I love everything about Bloodraven. Super great topic. So I think this is a good time to move on to the woman he desired.
Yeah.
And that is Shiera Seastar. She was born to Lady Serenai of Lys, and she sounds like a very much a Melisandre kind of figure. They talk about how she has otherworldly beauty, she has dark magic and witchcraft. There's stories that she bathes in blood to keep her young, which, a glamour would do. Who knows if maybe she wore one as she got older, if she's that kind of person. And all of these skills and things that are said about her mother get carried on to Shiera, the youngest of Aegon's bastards. But she, much like Bloodraven, she shares some kind of oddness to her. I mean, she is born with the classic Valyrian silver blonde hair, but she also has like the mismatched blue and green eyes, and and almost as like a way to play off Bloodraven, she wore almost nothing but white, whereas Bloodraven wore scarlet and sort of gray smoke black colors all the time. It's almost like, I mean, it's George, so I think he wrote them to be like the two sides of a coin sort of thing. Very similar characters.
Yeah, Beauty and the Beast. And gosh, why would George think of Beauty and the Beast? I have no idea.
Where did he ever get that from? And the Shiera and Bloodraven obviously shared very, very strongly in their interest. It's said over and over again that she was interested in magic. She was interested in the arcane and spell crafting. It's noted that she spoke a bunch of languages even when she was young, so she's seemingly a genius, maybe a mental match for Bloodraven, maybe smarter than him. I mean, certainly possible. And then there's this quote here from Duncan Egg about her rumors about her, which sound exactly like the ones you hear about Bloodraven, where Duncan says, "You've known queens and princesses. Did they dance with demons and practice the black arts?" Aegon says, "Lady Shiera does. Lord Bloodraven's paramour. She bathes in blood to keep her beauty." I mean, could there be two characters made for each other more than Shiera and Bloodraven?
They just love that magic. And they came along at a great time for it, because after Daeron's death, we get the bookish Aerys the First, not to be confused with the Mad King, but he certainly may have been a little bit off, but not in the cruel, ruthless type of off. He was just more of the, I love prophecies. This is the guy that probably is responsible for rediscovering the same prophecy that Rhaegar got turned on to. May have read the same books, because he would just love to hang out with the scrolls. And this is also fascinating because, like we said at the beginning, the most magically inclined Targaryen king, and probably the most inclined hand of the king, came during this low point of magic, when there's very little, there's no dragons, there's no I mean, we know there's some magic going on, because I mean, Bloodraven uses a glamour and is probably communing with the old gods on some level, if not early in life, then definitely later in life. So they kind of kept it alive, and so to speak. And I wonder too, that's something they could bond over. They had similar interests, looking at old prophecies, looking at old, and they have got a king that sponsors all this, that's into it, that supports it. So it was a good time for them. They probably had access to all kinds of books. They probably had, they could probably call up the High Tower, the Citadel, like, hey, send us a copy.
Or Aemon's in the Citadel at this point, probably.
Exactly. So it's just a great time for that. But on the other hand, it would have been a tumultuous time, because the ascension of Aerys was right after the massive damage of the Great Spring Sickness. So there would have been a lot of work to do. Now, I'm not sure what Shiera would have been doing. She wasn't employed. She didn't have any official court capacity as far as like a counselor. And she was kind of young around then too. So I kind of have this headcanon where she gets to hang out in the library a lot, and Bloodraven's got to go work, and he just, man, I wish I was in the library hanging out with Shiera, working on we got this plague to recover from. I gotta burn more bodies and stuff.
And it's very much you could see it was almost like a magical triad at the top of the Iron Throne at that point. As you said, Aerys is very interested in that. Bloodraven is, Shiera is as well. Like maybe the reason Aerys never got down with his wife and produced any heirs was because maybe he was in love with Shiera too. It seems like she had this massive attraction potential to men, that like a large part of like Bloodraven and Bittersteel's problems are Shiera Seastar. It is her. She is the wedge between them that seems to have broken whatever chance they had at being normal to each other. And I mean, she's at court most of the time. Maybe she was like a Septon Barth figure. Maybe she was, like you said, maybe she's always in the library with Aerys and they're reading all the old scrolls. But it's clear that the relationship between her and Bloodraven must have been unusual for him because it's a like to like. There's not many people at the High Court like Shiera Seastar or Bloodraven, and they happen to be Targaryen siblings. So it's like, oh, great. It's almost like maybe they saw it as like this person. Bloodraven probably saw Shiera as like, oh, she was put on Earth for me. Like nobody's gonna marry her because she's a bastard, or nobody powerful. Like nobody's gonna arrange marriages for him, especially when he's in charge. And they have all these shared interests. She's absolutely beautiful. She likes him too. It's like after a life of being the Bloodraven, the guy that's feared and hated throughout the Seven Kingdoms, it must have been very something for him to finally find somebody that appreciates who he is.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I wonder too about what Daeron would have thought of a marriage between them. We're told that Shiera refused him, but I wonder if Daeron would have even allowed it because he was against the incest practice. I mean, he was such a devout worshiper of the Seven, and they're obviously not cool with incest. You know, good on them. That's one thing in the faith of the Seven, and I agree on. Yeah. That's a good tenet they have there. So, yeah, he's a lonely guy that doesn't have a lot of people that, well, maybe I wouldn't assume he's lonely, but you could see how he would be because, like you said, there's just so few people out there that he would have as he could consider a peer. And here comes this woman that has almost everything in common with him. Yeah, it's crazy how you're right. Like he could see that as divine in some way, especially if that idea formed when he was very young, when we are more prone to fanciful ideas like that. I mean, Shiera would have been born when he was about 4 or 5. So you could definitely see where the young attitudes could crop into this and how his childhood attitude towards her would carry over into his adult attitude towards her and how that would be very emotional, you know, like
very, very deep to his core. Maybe something like Littlefinger feels towards Catelyn Stark. I mean, Catelyn Tully.
Yeah. Very good. That's really good, but with obviously a good bit more
actually mutual attraction.
But still ultimately not all the way, you know.
And it's noted that although Bloodraven focused on her, Shiera did not focus on Bloodraven. She had many admirers, she had many lovers, courtiers chasing her for marriages or to be their paramours. Bloodraven got the closest, but she never said yes to him. There's actually a really good quote here directly from Gurm, where he says, though she never wed, she had many offers and several lovers through the years. Duels were fought over the right to sit beside her. Just sit beside her. Men killed themselves after falling from her favor. Poets outdid each other, writing songs about her beauty. Her most ardent admirer was her half-brother, Bloodraven, who proposed marriage to her 100 times. 50 times he said, let's get married. 50 times she says no. Shiera gave him her bed, but never her hand. It amused her more to make him jealous. That is a character.
The woman that knew how powerful her beauty was and used it.
I mean, is there anybody that had more power over Bloodraven than Shiera Seastar? Probably not.
Probably not.
It seems like she had the most powerful man in Westeros wrapped around her finger his entire life, even after she's long gone.
Yes, I agree. And it sounds like, she sounds like she was very formidable, right? Like Cersei, the Cersei of her generation, but with a different personality and magical skills. A lot more talent probably in the on the brain side.
Seems to be a genius.
But you know, yeah, she seemed to be very smart.
And this is actually something that came up from our Crusader Kings 2 games, because we're playing in the same timeline, where Bloodraven really changes his trajectory if he ends up with Shiera, or he ends up like sticking with that. And I mean, this is a Crusader Kings 2 thing, but in the real timeline, what does happen to Bloodraven? Does he become the last Greenseer? Is he driven to duty as hard if Shiera says yes? If he actually gets her hand in marriage and starts having a family? I think there's a really good chance that never happens, that he never ends up beyond the wall to become this figure.
It's a good point, and it's a big mystery because Shiera for all we know, she died youngish. For all we know, she lived a long life. There's a huge gap in our knowledge of how long her life was, and that makes it hard to guess because, like you say, if she was dead by the time he killed Aenys to go, and knew he would probably be sent to the wall, then that's maybe part of it. In fact, maybe
that's why. Yeah,
kind of a random guess, but maybe that's around the time she passed, or perhaps left Westeros or something like that for good. It's hard to say. Like, for example, a theory I like is that we know Egg sent off for more knowledge about dragons, and if Shiera was still alive, then that's someone he could have sent off to go, hey, you go find out.
Yeah,
go to East, go to Ashai, go somewhere. And that's part of where the Shiera is Melisandre's mother theories originate. It's a piece of that, because there's a reason to think she could have gone overseas and explored some of these mysteries more. I'm not actually a big believer in that theory, but I don't think it's I don't rule it out by any means.
I mean, definitely.
Mother of Shiera being the mother of Melisandre, to be clear.
Which I'll be talking about in approximately 2 hours with Radio Westeros, as Yokeboy wrote that theory.
Yeah, they love that theory. They're big proponents of it, and you'll get the nice rundown of the evidence for it, and so I'll be the other side of it here.
the throwing the cold water on it. I also just think that you can see these relationships building between, like, Daeron represents sort of a duty aspect to Bloodraven's life, but Bittersteel and Shiera were hugely personal and hugely impactful, particularly the triangle between them, how those interacted and warped him from being, maybe just a master of whispers into deciding he needs to try and essentially be king of Westeros. He needs to defeat Bittersteel, even if it's to keep him away from getting Shiera. I mean, it could have been a protection thing at that point, where maybe he feared what would happen to her if Bittersteel won after all the rejections.
Okay. That's a good point.
Can make it more personal than it. I think the personal level of Bloodraven's life is so fascinating, and it's one that gets kind of undersold for the magical woo about him.
Bittersteel was like, "You've only got one eye to look at her with now."
Yeah, I bet it was. I bet he really enjoyed the fact that he made Bloodraven uglier, basically, maybe made him less attractive.
Had to have affected his archery.
And so let's move on to the last great bastard. I ran a poll yesterday talking about the brother he loved versus the brother he hated. The brother he hated was clear. Everyone thinks it's Aegor Rivers. Totally makes sense. Their relationship is a blood feud, essentially. 90% Aegor, 6% Daemon, 4% Daeron. Interesting that people thought he hated Daeron. But the brother he loved went a way that I didn't really expect, and it's one of those ones that you have to think about a little bit. Like, 53% say Daemon is the brother he loved, not Daeron, the one he served faithfully throughout his entire life. And I think a lot of it comes down to that Daemon, like we were talking about earlier, Daemon was a very decent person. He was charismatic. He was kind to people when he didn't have to be, because people in his position sometimes end up like Jaime Lannister, someone that great. And he's also everything Bloodraven was not. He is literally his opposite. He is strong. He is beloved by everybody. He has the classic Targaryen features. Looks like Aegon the Conqueror. Bloodraven looks like a weirwood. He's given Blackfyre by Aegon. He's even Targaryen on both sides. It's like, if you wanted to create somebody that Bloodraven would be jealous of and that would look up to, look no further than Daemon Waters. It's
so perfect. Yeah, the guy is like, has all the traits maximized, and people the one you'd love to follow. It seems like he's just like that. Has some, like, he has the Robert's battle charisma, where everyone is just eager to follow him, and he converts people to their side. But with Renly's popularity outside of combat, as someone who just makes everyone feel good about themselves, who knows the right thing to say out in public, knows how to compliment people, knows, has a winning smile, he's just everything. He's got everything, but included in that everything is the personality that keeps you from hating him. Because if he's a guy that has everything but was a jerk, you would hate him more for having everything, because he's using his powers for jerkiness, you know. But this is a guy but it's the opposite impact with a guy like Daemon, where you're like, this guy could be a huge jerk. Like, it would be so easy for him to look down on everyone, but he's actually pretty cool. He uses his powers to lift people up. Now, some of this is just us projecting. Like, we don't know that Daemon was this nice of a guy, but it's believable because of how many people willingly followed him and died for him. And maybe some of it was an act, like with Renly, using Renly's example. I mean, Renly behind closed doors said ugly things about Brienne that he would never say in public, and it gives you pause as to how much of Renly was an act, you know, shown to the public. Maybe Daemon had some of that, like, fakeness to him. So we can go, but people who were close to him loved him. Renly is sort of the same case, but we don't have a lot of people. There weren't a lot of people around Renly that knew him well that loved him, right? Like, Brienne was in love with him, but she did not know him very well. Loras was also in love with him. Loras knew him well, but Loras was in love with him. You're not
literally in love with him.
Biased in that point. And Loras is also like 16, fell in love with him when he was probably like 13 or something. So it's also boyhood crush stuff. He's not the best example, the most balanced opinion. So these parallels can only be taken so far, but you can see the way you can extrapolate a lot based on how people treated him, people who knew him well, you know. I think that says a lot.
I think the Brienne-Renly comparison is maybe right on the nose for the relationship between Bloodraven and Daemon, where Renly was very, very kind to Brienne in a way nobody else was. Like, she remembers that ball where everybody laughed at her. She remembers how everyone treats her as an outsider, and it's Renly's moment of kindness dancing with her that she holds on to the rest of her life. It could have been something very similar with Daemon, where maybe he doesn't like Bloodraven, maybe he thinks he's kind of ridiculous or a bit creepy and evil, but it only takes these small moments of kindness that he doesn't have to give to create long-lasting love, as Bloodraven says he has, probably for Daemon.
Yeah, he has first impression privilege. You could say that as long as he's not a jerk, he's going to leave a great positive impression because of his bearing, his personality, all his amazing skills that he has, that somehow doesn't corrupt him into being like a scumbag. Maybe he was entitled, maybe he was talked into rebelling when he shouldn't have. That's another story we don't know about. A lot of missing details from that. But yeah, there's a reason why the fandom tends to paint Daemon Blackfyre as a decent guy, and it's a lot based on how the people who knew him seem to treat him. So that's a real world thing, right? Like, we don't know the personality of a lot of these public figures, but if we know what the people close to them, how they get treated, you can extrapolate a lot from that. Like, the way people who know the person really think of that person says a lot.
That's true. And oh god, what was I going to say? Looked up to him, Damon's presence. I had a point. What was that point?
What was that point? We need
I had
the Werewolf Network to
something about Brienne and
Brienne.
Oh no, the point was and when your other half brother is Bittersteel, like, even the small amount of decency that Daemon may have showed him may have been much more impactful for him. When you have one half brother who absolutely loathes you, makes your life miserable, the other one doesn't even have to be that great to you. Just being a normal person to you is a great gift in a way that Daemon may never have realized Bloodraven felt him about.
That's a good point. Yeah, by comparison, you know, Daemon may have just been a decent brother, but compared to Bittersteel, he would have been a great. Yeah, I really think Aegor picked on him and
a lot. Probably beat the crap out of him. Probably a similar relationship between, like, maybe the Mountain and Gregor, something like that.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, Mountain and Sandor. Sorry. The Mountain picking on himself, punching himself in the face.
I didn't even notice the mistake there.
And I mean, there's similarities in their backgrounds, particularly that Bloodraven and Daemon both chase women they cannot have. Bloodraven wants Shiera Seastar. Daemon wants Daenerys Targaryen, and it's. I mean, it's an oversimplified thing, much in the same way that Robert's rebellion was about Lyanna Stark. Daemon's rebellion was not about Daenerys, but it was something. It meant something to him that that Daeron essentially sold Daenerys to the Dornish to bring them into the Seven Kingdoms, that it was a business exchange. From the stories, he took that personally, and that rejection is probably something that him and Bloodraven could bond over. When like Daemon starts talking about Daenerys, Bloodraven can start talking about Shiera and how she won't have him. Daemon can't go down and get Daenerys. She won't leave her husband. There's at least a point of comparison between two guys that seem totally opposite.
That's a good point. Yeah, having loving and having a love not be possible because of politics and other circumstances, and Daemon may have been on the younger side when this decision with Dorne was made. Of course, it had been made long before. Even it was just being followed up on the game of age. Like, okay, you guys are old enough to get married now. Go ahead, and. Yeah, that's really interesting. And another missing piece here that's really big. We touched on it at the beginning, but we haven't necessarily applied it to Daemon yet. We talked about Bloodraven's mother, and we talked a little bit about Bittersteel's mother, who was a crazy, scheming, bitter person too. You can see where he gets it from. Well, Daemon's mother, Daena the Defiant, she, like Shiera Seastar, there's a huge, wide open gap as to how long she may or may not have lived. Like, for all we know, she died before the first Blackfyre Rebellion. For all we know, she outlived Daemon by 20 years. We have no idea. And she seemed like a really interesting person, and her influence may have been big on Daemon, or lack of influence may have been big on him. Lack of a mother is a big deal too, right? I mean, lack of a father is a big deal, but especially lack of a mother. So this is a big wild card for both of them. I mean, for all we know, Bloodraven had a relationship with Daena the Defiant. Maybe maybe they had not like a relationship, like a loving relationship. Maybe. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. Something like that. They could have gotten along. They could have had some things in common. Who knows? It's one of the difficult things about this time period is there's so many interesting characters at court at the same time, and the way they interacted with each other. Some of these one-on-one relationships we have no information on whatsoever. This is a good one, like Daena and Brynden. We have no clue how these figures interacted. Or really with Daemon, which is about anyone. We have no idea how she interacted with, except maybe Aegon the Unworthy himself, and that only when they were young. So
any relationship with Aegon would have been terrible. Fire and Blood Part 2, give us this information.
Yes, please. Can't wait.
And then we get to this was probably their young life, but then we get to obviously Daemon's rebellion and the immense amount of pressure that must have been on Bloodraven as he is seeing his siblings gearing up for war. We learn from the text that Bloodraven found out about his rebellion ahead of time. So Bloodraven has this information. He knows Daemon and Bittersteel are going to crown Daemon and challenge Daeron. What does he do with it? Like, how do you make that choice personally? You hate Bittersteel, but supposedly you love Daemon. You have this immense amount of respect and sense of duty towards Daeron and the Iron Throne. Shiera, like I said, with Shiera, maybe if Bloodraven is killed, Bittersteel takes her hostage. You never know. He's that kind of a dick. He could do that. And Bloodraven has to make this intensely personal choice on his values about, does he drop the dime on Daemon now that he knows it? He knows it a month ahead of time. That's enough time. If he wants to, just hold on to it. Let Daemon start his war, and Daemon's off to a great start. But he goes the other way. Interesting to think about why he made that decision.
Yeah, it's really peculiar. I mean, this is, in fact, why this is the point of my shirt. In fact, Pat's idea was that there was no plot for Daemon to crown himself. That Daemon wasn't going to crown himself. It was something that was made up to get rid of him, and so he was like, well, now I have to do it. I have to crown myself because otherwise I'm going to die. It's kind of like Aegon II and Criston Cole, where Aegon II is like, no, I'm not going to steal my sister's crown, and Aegon and Alicent are like, or Criston Cole and Alicent are like, yeah, but once she's queen, they're going to kill you. It's not just stealing your crown, it's keeping yourself alive. And this is harder to believe in this case because the idea that Daeron would have Daemon executed is, yeah, that's kind of hard to believe. I mean,
even for
I don't
treason.
see that.
Like, Daeron put so much work into building that relationship with Daemon. I mean, he landed him, built him a castle, made him a lord in his own right. None of the great bastards got that. Like, Daeron was dedicated to making sure Daemon did not rebel.
Yeah. So you could have a case where it's like a Melisandre situation where if Bloodraven is using magic early in his career and he sees prophecies or sees the future, misinterprets it, and he thinks Daemon Blackfyre is got to be killed or else all this stuff happens. And maybe it's a case of, I mean, this is somewhat tinfoily, but maybe this started it all. If Bloodraven trying to kill Daemon to stop a future Blackfyre rebellions actually is what created it. It's like the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, we haven't talked about prophecy a lot, but that has to be a major part of his life. We know he's a Greenseer. Maybe his dragon dreams too. Imagine what a nightmare that would be for Bloodraven if he has both going on in his head. I mean, yeah. if they're not the same thing, but yeah,
it's hard not to think that, especially with the comparisons with Stannis and Melisandre, because we have Maegor in Bloodraven for his second half of Bloodraven's career as Hand of the King. It's as the voice on the king's right shoulder whispering in his ear, which is so. Comparing Melisandre to Bloodraven is super easy because they have so much in common. It's only like physical traits and relationship traits they have in common, let alone the possibility that, you know, Melisandre's his son or something, or daughter or something like that. So there's just a lot of potential there, and it's compelling to think about, yeah, this is maybe Bloodraven. What did he see? What did he see in the future? Did he mess it up? Did he go the wrong way? Did he misinterpret some of it? Because that's obviously a recurring theme among us like Fire, is people misinterpreting prophecies and this
even himself. Yeah, we know he gets it wrong sometimes.
Yeah, and this would fit super well because he would have been young. This is like when mistakes, he doesn't yet have the wisdom of not realizing, oops, like, oh, well, now I know that prophecies real bad if you get this wrong, and you got to be real sure, and because he knows. He's like, I have screwed this up before.
And even like, let's say he does use his abilities. Let's say he skin changes into a raven, and it's in there, and you hear Daemon and Bittersteel talking like, you should crown yourself, and we'll start in a month. Well, until he crowns himself, he has not actually done it. There is still a way back. Like, Bloodraven could have gone to Daemon and said, I found out about this, like, don't do this, convince him. Like, there's a lot of time in between the crowning and when Bloodraven apparently tells Daeron it's happening, where it doesn't have to go to war. And it seems like Bloodraven particularly gave the information out in a way that ensured that it had to, rather than being the peacekeeper.
Yeah, just making sure it gets out. There's forcing the issue, basically, saying, look, this is going to happen one way or another. We're going to bring this to a head.
Which must have really hurt him personally if this is the brother he loves. Like, how bad must it have been? What would he have to know about Daemon, either prophecy-wise, personal-wise, what he fears about the realm, that he is willing to betray Daemon? It's like Jon turning on Robb. How could this happen?
Which is why we think big here, which is why we're like, well, maybe he saw some awful future for the realm if he doesn't do this. If you're right, it has to be something pretty big for him to turn against someone he loved. And that does fit. If he thinks that, well, if I don't act, then
the end of the world,
generations of, whatever, something awful, or the realm will be gutted at a time when it needs to be strong because of some great evil coming. Who knows what he saw, but we know he has the capability to see these things. And it could also explain one of the things why he's so dead set on saving the realm now, is if
this was a mistake.
If it was a mistake that he's atoning for, or if he's just kind of always had this personality. He's always taken this responsibility. But I think it's a little more compelling with what you said. That is, if he's atoning, he's like, I'm a reason why things are bad right now, and I can help that. I have the ability to undo the harm and to help humanity survive this crisis, etc. I can see that fitting very, very well.
Especially because we know when we see other dragon dreamers, Daeron the Drunkard, another Daeron, he tries to avoid the Ashford tourney because he thinks a dragon will die there. And he thinks, if I just stay in this inn, nothing will happen. But it's actually Daeron's actions that make Baelor die. It would be perfectly in sync with George's understanding of prophecy and people that see it, that avoiding it makes it happen. If he thinks Blackfyres and the Civil War will cause something awful, trying to avert it ahead of time makes it happen.
I agree. It's so he uses this device a lot. It's no surprise that we lean that way. And it's not like he uses a lot of other devices with prophecy, right? Like the recurring use of prophecy in A Song of Ice and Fire is mostly leads to tragedy, right? I mean, it's when has following, like, give me an example in A Song of Ice and Fire of people following prophecy and it going really well for them. Maybe they avoid things being worse, but like it's never like, good thing we listened to that prophecy. We're sitting pretty now.
And I mean, even in the modern sense, Daenerys keeps trying to figure out the Undying's prophecy, and that probably makes her mistrust people she probably shouldn't, because she thinks they will betray her. Therefore, the mistrust creates the relationship. It's like, ah, oh, George, you bastard.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have someone like Bran, who's just it's not necessarily prophecy with him, but he keeps getting told what's possible and seeing that, well, those people are wrong. I can do things that they said were impossible. Like, so why should I listen to them? That's not great.
That's true. And then just to get back to Daemon, I think Redgrass Field must have been the turning point in Bloodraven's life, maybe the most important moment in his life, the one he looks back on the most. We know Fireball got killed before the battle by a stray arrow. You can almost certainly say that's Bloodraven's doing. Him and the Raven's Teeth probably assassinated him because he was such a great commander to give themselves a better chance. But then
Bloodraven shot first. That's the point. Yeah.
He definitely shot first. But then we have that you have this idea of what Bloodraven thinks of Daemon, because he absolutely refuses to face him in the field of battle, whereas he does face Bittersteel. Instead, Bloodraven goes up on a ridge with the Raven's Teeth and shoots down Daemon and his two sons, Aemon and Aegon, when they attempt to take a Blackfyre and guard his body. This is how much he fears Daemon Blackfyre. He is unwilling to get within 100 yards of the guy in a battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, he basically, his plan was a battlefield assassination, I think. And it's one thing that's a small detail here that might need fleshing out is people call him a kinslayer for this, but there's no proof that he's the actual killer. I mean, he's up there with 300 of other dudes with bows, and who knows what arrows actually killed Daemon and his sons. But of course, it was his orders. You can calling him a kinslayer via, ordering the death of this man, I think it still counts. Whatever. I don't know what the rules are. We have to have an old god's court for that. Like, what?
We'll need Clinton Maester Mary for this one.
Yeah, we do. This is definitely a learned hands question. So, but regardless, it's your point. It stands. Whatever way it work out, he had a plan to. No, we're not going to win this battle honorably. We're going to kill the reason this war is happening. It's kind of like Mormont's plan, even Slint's plan to deal with the free folk. It's like kill Mance Rayder, and the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah,
just quite simply because Mance's kids not going to keep this thing going. Ditto, Daemon's kids. They were too young. Of course, they didn't.
Nobody counts on Bittersteel,
right? They didn't reckon for Bittersteel keeping it going, but it was it's a ruthless, dishonorable plan, but a good one as far as like keeping the body count low. It just didn't work because of Bittersteel, but hey, that was hard to see coming.
Still a good plan. And it also it goes to kind of what Bloodraven is thinking about in this moment, where how much did it hurt him personally to actually knock his arrows and throw them against Daemon? Like, this whole time, the brother he loves, the one that he probably looks up to, the only one that's been good to him, he's having to sit there like agonizing inside that I have to kill him. And how do I actually get myself to this place? Well, it helps that he has 300 Raven's Teeth with him, but he still has to order them. He still has to shoot those arrows. This must have been maybe as heartbreaking for him as maybe the last time he saw Shiera.
And this is where we come back to Jon Snow, because Jon Snow may have a rather difficult decision to make with a certain person he loves that he may think he has to kill because
Yes.
of what the future will mean without if she's alive. So yeah, I mean, it's a different kind of love to be sure, but
Well, maybe a different kind of love. Wink, wink.
yeah, maybe you're right. But also that type of love does exist in this character because of Shiera. We know that that aspect of him is fleshed out.
Mm-hmm. Does have a heart.
The elements are there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, simple as that, basically. And that is really, really conflicting, a really difficult thing to consider. And, he's not a monster. He may be ruthless, but like you said, it couldn't have just been, oh, well, time to kill some nephews.
Oh, well, I gotta kill some Blackfyres. No big deal, guys. Let's knock up the bows. No, this must have been really hard for him, and the point at which he felt there was no turning back. At this point, he is committed to Daeron, the Targaryens, to duty. There's no going back on the Aemon's choice narrative. He has chosen duty.
Yeah, and this is where you can see more echoes of Renly, right? We have Renly on the eve of battle. It's instead of during battle, he's killed amidst his army when it looks pretty good for him, because it looked like, at the time the battle was going pretty well until he died. And that's also, that makes Bittersteel a little bit of, gives a little bit of a Loras parallel there, where Loras goes mad and carries, grabs Renly's body and runs off, keeps the
dream. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I'm not sure that Bittersteel had romantic feelings for Daemon, but
maybe. You never know. He was so handsome.
I did ask George R. R. Martin directly if Bittersteel had kids with Calla Blackfyre, which is Daemon's eldest daughter, who he married. George said, "Don't think so. No."
Interesting.
So, indeed, yeah. And John Connington, who we said is a parallel, Bittersteel was obviously in love with Rhaegar.
His Silver Prince. Wasn't Daemon called that? Was he called the Silver Prince too?
I wouldn't be surprised if someone called him that. I can't think of it specifically happening, but I wouldn't
somebody else that's called that within the Targaryen lineage. It's not just Rhaegar.
Yeah.
It may have been one of Jaehaerys' kids. I may be making that up.
I can. It seems like it would fit amongst the Targaryens here and there.
And I think once we tie these all together, it's not just that the Great Bastards and Daeron are just people Bloodravens bouncing off of. These are his family. These are his family in the same way Jon feels that Arya is his family, the same way that Theon fits into that family unit. Like, these are all very important to him. And that they are breaking up, that he's forced to kill some of them, that some of them hate him, it's not just high politics, it's intensely personal, and it shapes who he becomes.
Yeah. Oh, hey, by the way, it looks like Delana in the chat says, "You're the Silver Prince."
Oh, well. Well, I'd rather be the Brown Prince, I guess. I don't like...
the brown dragon.
I liked it when my hair was brown, not silver. So I think what we're going to do here, we have a couple more sections, but I think we'll just switch to questions. We only have about a half hour left. We have some taken from, I took from Twitter and YouTube and Patreon. You guys in the chat, start throwing out questions you want at us. If there's anything that you definitely want us to get to, you throw out a super chat and we will answer it. So I think the first one here was from Mary Ann, one of my patrons. She says, I'm just going to give you guys a warning. Most of them are based on around magic. I chose to put the stream more on Bloodraven as a personality. Obviously, everyone loves Bloodraven as magic, so we'll be probably talking about that a lot this last half hour. So it says, do you think Bloodraven is controlling or even influence the Weirwood network, or does it control him? Does he have all the information all the time, change him from the manipulator he was into a better man, a worse man, or no one at all? It's sort of, how much is he merging with the Weirwood net at this point? What do you think, Aziz?
Well, I think he's definitely a better man because he's less of a man. In terms of what his goal is now, if his goal is to save humanity, which I do believe, I'm not a believer in the tinfoil, he's actually a bad guy stuff, given how he lived his life so much for the realm. I think that's still what he's doing now. So he's no longer as bound by his human frailties. He's no longer bitter over Bittersteel or he probably feels a lot less pain and sorrow over Shiera, but he might still have this goal of atoning for things during his life, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But even that might be just kind of fallen by the wayside as the longer he's been in the tree. I mean, he's been in the tree for 30 plus years by the time Bran gets to him.
He's been in the tree a long time.
A long time for his humanity to fade somewhat and to be more focused on his task. Not that that's definitely what happened, but that's also a little aside from the question, which is, does it control him or does he control it? I think that it's a little of both. I think it's presented as a collective, which the term control maybe isn't the best fit for a collective in the first place. But if you're coming part of a collective, then you can arguably say that it's controlling him, even though he's a part of it too. But it's not like a dictatorship or something where there's one Greenseer within the network that's been there thousands of years that dominates all the other personalities in there. So I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to conceptualize that way, especially with the magic. But I think there's some theories out there that the Targaryen blood in him is a poison to the weirwood network, or it's an weird impact, or an element that they're not used to. I find that interesting, although I don't want to go too far with that because it's not necessarily anything at all. It might matter, but it's not exactly something we have a lot of evidence for one way or another. It's just a cool idea. So I think that he's learned a lot from it. I think it's the power of his knowledge and what he can see into the past is really would likely have changed him. Something you brought up at the beginning is, did he replay these moments? Does he go back and look at Shiera through the weirwood net like Bran is looking at his father and all that? I think that's likely something he did early on. 30 years later, I'm not so sure he's still doing that, but who knows? I mean,
I think it would be the first thing most of us would do would be replay your life for quite a bit, and especially like we were talking about, if Daemon was his fault, like reflecting on all these things, seeing where he went wrong, seeing how he caused the very problems that he was trying to solve, must have been very humbling for him, especially knowing that the old gods were watching the whole time going, Brynden, you're messing up, my dude. As in terms of how much they're controlling him, he still seems to be himself most of the time. I mean, he even is self-reflective, but I think the relationship that the show portrays, where the Last Greenseer, which is what Bloodraven is called by the children, versus what it is in the show, I think it's different. Where in the show, it made it seem like the Last Greenseer was the entire network. At least in the books, we know there's other Greenseers linked up. We know there's the Ghost of High Heart. So maybe he's the most influential living part of the weirwood network, but I don't think he's all of it. And he definitely seems to... He is much more a person than Bran was in season 8, I would say.
Yeah.
There's personality there.
Super chat just came out.
Oh yeah, Aaron M. Thank you very much with her classic 1999, because YouTube is weird and doesn't allow you to round up to $20. I don't quite understand it. She says, so pumped for the Quaranstream after 2-week absence. Thank you both. Yeah, I had to work last weekend. That was kind of a bummer. Do you think it's possible that Shiera wouldn't have Bloodraven because she knew what he was destined to do and felt it was her duty to reject him?
Ooh.
Very interesting. We do have that direct quote from George that she did definitely enjoy having power over him, that there was a teasing element that she enjoyed having him essentially on a string. But that doesn't mean the other isn't true, especially if she is connected to this magical world as Bloodraven is. You know, there could be two people looking at the same event and seeing it differently.
Yeah, that's a great question. I never thought about it. I mean, I've tried to think about a lot of things from Shiera's perspective, but I never thought about her seeing his future. That's one that I over. So that is pretty neat, because wow, what his future would look bizarre to a person who's, I mean, it just does not look like a normal person future. Be like, boy, this is long, man. What?
Wait, how long does he live? What does he look like now? He's dead, but he's alive.
Like, I just look into your future and I just see a tree. What's going?
I'm like, what if she saw what Melisandre sees? What if she sees Bloodraven and Bran? That ancient wooden face with 1,000 eyes. Imagine how terrifying that would be.
That was true.
That's the guy I'm in love with? That guy? Oof. Well, I don't know if in love, but another super chat here from D-Cell. €5, I think. I think that's what that means. Thank you very much. Do you like the theory about Bloodraven being Craster's father? No. I do not like that theory. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. There's clearly Bloodraven throughout his life. Even though it's actually kind of funny when he's Maynard Plum, he seems to be kind of horny on Main. He asks about like Duncan's sex life and implies that he should go get laid quite a lot. So he's obviously a sexual being himself, but his heart seems to have belonged to Shiera. And I would be surprised if after she's gone or after he's on the wall that he would probably see that as betraying her memory, much in the same way Jon feels about Ygritte.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I mean the ages work out okay for that, so it's possible, but yeah, it doesn't seem like the type. And Bloodraven didn't father children elsewhere, so
that we know of.
Yeah, we know of. So yeah, I'm a little dubious of that as well.
There's clearly so much love that he felt for her that if he did, it would take a remarkable woman, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and also physically, Craster is a big guy. You know, like they don't have like the look that part doesn't argue for it either.
Another super chat. They are coming in fast and furious. I swear I'll get back to the ones in the chat and the ones I have in the doc. Here be Dragon, Steven Stark. Thank you very much. $5. He says, do you think we'll see Dark Sister? Aziz, I think you have a unique perspective on this.
Well, earlier I brought up the question I asked George about Bittersteel. In the same session, Ashea asked a question that got a much more important and direct answer, which was, she asked him, and we have a recording of this, so we have proof. She said, did Bloodraven take Dark Sister to the wall? And George said, yes. It was a very clear yes. There was no beating around the bush. He said yes. So Bloodraven did take Dark Sister to the wall, which means he certainly had it when he was lost beyond the wall, which means it's probably in that cave, which means Mira or Hodor or Bran or whatever. One of those people can find it and repurpose it. Like, well, you don't need this anymore, do you, Bloodraven? Like, yeah, just take it. Sure, go ahead.
Or on their way out, they're just grabbing whatever's there. It's like, oh my God, there's a sword. Hodor, grab it. Mira, grab it. Whatever.
Yeah, and the fact that he answered the question directly and relatively quickly indicates he's thought about it. It wasn't like, because sometimes he says, well, when he's at Bittersteel, he says, I'm not. She's like, I'm pretty sure no. He didn't answer because he probably hasn't fully thought about it. He might decide maybe it would make sense for Bittersteel to have had a child. But this one he's had already thought about and made a decision for. So that tells us he's decided at least something about the future of this sword. He's decided it's going to matter at least a little bit, that it's probably going to be found. So I'm excited about that because I'm personally a believer in Arya getting it eventually. I mean, there's a lot of little clues that it would fit her so nicely.
She loves Visenya.
That's a whole nother question. Yeah, she loves Visenya. She's Dark Sister. I mean, that kind of
literally the Dark Sister. Yeah.
It's a sword that's kind of similar to Needle in its size. I mean, it's a little bigger, but you know, Cat's Paw Dagger is not as much a thing in the books as the show,
No.
and she show. So maybe
they could have done it, but I guess they didn't want to retcon that in, or didn't put the layering for Dark Sister being a thing, so I can understand why you wouldn't, if it ends up in Arya's hands. Yeah. I think it will be one of those things that's just like a really cool Easter egg. Like, nobody's going to recognize it. Nobody's going to look at it and go, oh, Dark Sister, the sword of the Targaryens. Like, that's not going to happen.
But it will help establish his identity a little more. Yeah. And it will to make it clear who he is. Because a lot of, like, casual readers don't know who he is still, unless you've done forums and podcasts and stuff. So it's really going to make his identity more clear. And, like, to directly, to be more direct with Steven's question, there's more and more talk of Valyrian steel and how the others are going to be fought. And sure, why we need more swords that can be used against the others. That makes sense to have more of that in play.
Maybe his last act will be pointing it out, like, by the way, take that sword.
Yeah, it's like, on your way out, you might want that.
That thing's important. Take it with you. Good luck. I'm about to die. Hold the door. Blah, blah, blah. Classic Bloodraven. Question here from Scott McCloy. He says, what do you think Bloodraven will do in the She-Wolves of Winterfell? This is a really interesting thing because Dunk and Egg is not over. George, as far as he's concerned, wants to take it all the way up to Summerhall, and the next one supposedly coming out will be the She-Wolves of Winterfell, where Dunk and Egg end up in Winterfell on their way to the wall where Dunk wants to find his father. I don't know why he thinks he's there. Dunk thinks he is. And there's going to be a power struggle with all these different Stark women and widows. What is Bloodraven's role in that? There's a quote from him when he's Maynard Plum where he's like, I'm not going north, it's too cold up there. But there's a weirwood there. There is Bloodraven has the ability to be anywhere. So could he be involved with it? That would be interesting. Especially if maybe that's the reason we see what most people think is Dunk and old Nan kissing. Maybe the reason Bran has a vision of it is because Bloodraven was watching at the moment. He's like, that's what created the memory. That would be kind of funny.
That would be kind of funny. One thing we've learned is, and this isn't great news in terms of that story, is that George has actually bumped She-Wolves.
Yeah.
Another one in between it.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
The good news is that's probably going to involve more about Bloodraven, because there's a very good chance this is when we get Egg meeting Betha Blackwood. So Blackwood, there's a very good chance for Bloodraven or Melissa to be involved. So that's very compelling, and potentially Maester Aemon as well. I saw someone asking in the chat about Maester Aemon, and that's an important thing because Maester Aemon and Bloodraven were on the wall at the same time for quite a while. In fact, they went at the same time. They were on the same ship.
There's good reason to think, much in the same way that Shiera and Bloodraven had huge overlaps in interest, so does Aemon. He has all the same things as Shiera does, and I would not be surprised if they were essentially friends. And all of these things are kind of coming at the same time. All these things are floating around Winterfell, which you don't really expect for Targaryens, but if Bloodraven is the student of prophecy that we know he is, and he's seeing things far in the future, maybe he sees this as like a Jon Snow sort of thing. Like, what if he starts seeing these interactions between Dunk and Egg and wondering if this is the future that ends up being Jon, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And you can draw a straight line from Maester Aemon talking to Rhaegar about the prince that was promised and all that, and say, well, where did Maester Aemon get some of these ideas? And some of them he may have gotten on his own, but some of them he probably got from the dude he was on the wall with. Yeah. The guy, Maester, while Bloodraven's Lord Commander. I mean, they clearly worked together. They could not have avoided each other. It's impossible. So a lot of what Maester Aemon learned could have come from Bloodraven and gone to Rhaegar via Maester Aemon, and then back around to Jon. So yeah, like, this is a really tight little circle of characters with similar beliefs or connections that the line is clear where and how they connect. So.
And then not only just those two, you also have King Aerys, you also have Daeron the Drunkard, who is actually having these visions. Like, there's this whole through line that goes from the children of Maekar directly to Rhaegar, directly to Jon. They are connected somehow.
Yeah.
And
I love your theory about that the prior Targaryens who were dreaming of dragons were seeing Daenerys and thinking it was themselves. So if we take that idea, I mean, it fits super well because someone like Aerys, who's like mixing things with Wildfire, and all these other guys who were immolating them, thinking that self-immolation would somehow be a good idea. It's like, if they were dreaming, Daenerys did it, you can see, well, I can see why that would make sense then. Now, so what is Bloodraven seeing in the future about some of these characters? Is he seeing the future of Jon? Is he seeing the future of Maester Aemon? Is he seeing any of that? And is he getting it wrong? Is he making mistakes like Melisandre or anything like that?
Everybody does.
Yeah, which is that's a probably yes. It's a matter of which mistakes, not did he make them.
And how bad.
Yeah. So I love that idea because the mistakes of prophecy are a huge part of the series, and all of this comes back to the wall. Melisandre on the wall talking to Jon and telling him things. It just sounds like Bloodraven and Maester Aemon. It's like a very similar situation where one of them's telling the other all this magic stuff, and neither of them is quite sure if it's accurate or not. but they know that some of it's got to be real, because damn if the others aren't real, and damn if Melisandre doesn't have real powers. So like this, you certainly can't just dismiss it, even if they've got some details wrong. Well, damn.
Yeah, for sure. That video, by the way, is called I changed the name. The title card says Pyres and Blood, but I think I made it what is the secret behind Targaryen madness? I'm gonna look this up. I should know the names of my own videos, probably. It's called What Causes Targaryen quote unquote madness, Pyres and Blood. I'll put a link afterwards if you guys are watching this back. You were on stream for the one before that, the one talking about Aemon, but yeah, very similar ideas. Those two videos work together, the same idea, drawing the comparison between them. Let's grab one here from Twitter, just because. Oh no, this wasn't from Twitter. This was from the YouTube comments. Jan Wooter says, it seems Brynden doesn't know who the Three-Eyed Raven is, so who is he? How is he related to Brynden? This is one of those theories that has been kicking around that I don't like, because I think there's a very simple explanation, but you talked about it earlier, how a lot of people there is the segment of fandom that is unsure if the Three-Eyed Crow that Bran meets is Brynden Rivers, even though it definitely seems like it is. And the explanation I've come up with that I think just makes it so simple is that the Three-Eyed Crow is a name that Bran made up. It's a name that him and Jojen called whatever they were seeing Bloodraven as. And then when they get there, they essentially go, oh, you're the Three-Eyed Raven. And Bloodraven goes, what? Because everyone's been calling me the Last Greenseer. Everyone's been calling me like all these other names. I've never heard that one. But yeah, that's me. I was the one appearing to you. And then Bran eventually goes like, oh yeah, it is him. It's just, it was disappointing to see this weird corpse guy when I was expecting basically Gandalf.
Yeah, and there's another exact parallel here, which is Cold Hands. Cold Hands' name is not Cold Hands. No. They just, what do we call that guy? Well, his hands are cold. Let's call him Cold Hands. So it's exactly what you said. They didn't have a name for him, so they just wanted to call him something. They didn't want to just keep calling him that guy in my dream, or that
crow thing.
That bird in my dream. So nor do they want to call him the Undead Ranger or whatever. So they just made up a name for him. Yeah. So I think I agree with you. It's just as simple as that. And he does even say in the appendix, the Three-Eyed Raven blood is Brynden Rivers.
It is him. It's the theory should die, but I understand people love the idea. The show actually played this up, that there's a difference between a Three-Eyed Crow as this like immortal figure in charge of the Weirwood net, and then there's also the Last Greenseer, and they're separate. There is some truth to that, but I don't think that's what this means. It's just that George writing backwards, like, because he didn't know that Bloodraven was a Blackwood back when he made this character up. So it's one of those things where you can see the lines of creation and his gardening style kind of fraying. The images don't match up exactly because it wasn't him at first. Now it is.
It was a dark. He had the Targaryen stuff, but I don't think he had the Blackwood. You're right. He hadn't decided to make him a figure of mixed ice and fire heritage, I think, at that point. And I mean, there is that moment that the Raven bringing the news of Ned's death comes in, and it's literally a bloody raven, because it was like attacked by a hawk and it was missing some feathers, and it's like, is this meant to be a reference to Bloodraven, or did George look back on that moment and say, I put a bloody raven in this scene, so why not use that name?
Yeah.
Maybe the raven came before the name Bloodraven, because he's like, well, what have I associated with this character so far? And let's build on that. Like you said, it's a gardening thing, right? I love that.
Yeah, and by the way, sometimes it's seamless, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Sometimes it fits better than others. We should mention, since I brought up Cold Hands, that I think Cold Hands is one of the Raven's teeth, which is fitting for why he's still loyal to Bloodraven in death, and why Bloodraven vanished on arranging, and you'd think the men he'd take with him would be the guys that were most loyal to him. He's going out in the wilderness when probably a faction of the Wall wants him dead.
Sure.
Like John.
Probably unhappy with them. Let's grab a couple more from the chat, because I gotta get going soon. Obviously way more to we have literally not gotten to Bloodraven going to the Wall in this conversation. We have stopped at the end of the Blackfyre Rebellions. There's this whole other part of his character we're kind of touching on, but not really going in depth on.
This is why there is so much content on this character.
This is why History of Westeros has 7 hours of content on the character.
And I feel like we missed stuff. I mean, there's things I brought up in this one that I don't think I brought up in any of those 7 hours. So,
okay, so this is actually a good question. Same from the same. Wait. Oh no, I like this one better. From Callie Kesh from YouTube says, "Do you think he sent the boar to kill King Robert?" King Robert is quoted saying something like, "The gods sent him when the bastard got me." There's also noted that the boar has one red eye or something like that. Like, this is one of those questions that gets towards like, yeah, I think it's like it has like one eye or something like that. It's there's some clues behind it, but this sort of gets at the idea of how much is Bloodraven still involved with day-to-day politics in Westeros. Do you think maybe he had a hand in deposing King Robert because he wants to make Jon Snow and Daenerys happen? Like, how far are his plans going? He's clearly probably sending the wolves to Bran, so he's having some hand in it, but like, how far do you think he's going?
I think that I downplay some of it, but there's a lot. There's got to be a few things that are in play. For example, I think he quite clearly didn't interfere at the Fist of the First Men. He could have maybe done something. Maybe he sent cold hands to bury the cash nearby, but that was more of a thing for later rather than a thing to help them during the Fist, because the cash wouldn't have been very helpful during that battle, because they needed. The cash is more useful against the others than we don't even know how effective Dragonglass is against whites in the books. We certainly saw it be effective in the show, but that's not. We have no example in the books, because the one time Sam tries to use his Dragonglass on a white, it's Small Plow's armor blocks it, so it's not a conclusive test. Anyway, I do think that he has manipulated some events, like the direwolves for sure. And there's so many times where Mormont's Ravens talks in a certain way. And there's another time that I'm very sure of, which is 3 times Sam runs away beyond the wall. One, he just sits down on the ground and Small Paul picks him up and carries him away. Another time he sits down at Craster's and his friends slap him and are like, we got to go. And there's no Small Paul to carry him this time, so they just have to go. There's no choice. They can't carry him, and so they leave him. And the third time is when Small Paul attacks him and Gilly, and he's before they're coming. There's a bunch of whites, and a raven lands on Sam's shoulder and says, "Run!"
Yeah,
run! I'm like, okay, that's Bloodraven.
That's definitely Bloodraven.
That's the almost the only other one that I'm 100% sure about. Well, maybe there's another one, but the election, John's election, is like
that one seems Bloodraven-esque.
There's a chance that's Mormont himself, but I think it's Bloodraven, because Mormont's Raven was saying all sorts of stuff before Mormont died too. So, I feel like that was already happening. So it's fair to consider a lot of political events as maybe being influenced by Bloodraven, but you got to take it with a grain of salt, because it can get to be too much. And I don't see the immediate value of Robert's death, because then the Lannisters just take over. And is it really Bloodraven killed Robert just so the Lannisters could take over? So that could lead to so that could lead to this and that. I don't know. It seems like he could have manipulated events a little more directly than this thing that leads to this thing that leads to this that leads to this that maybe is part of his plan. But Daenerys,
what is that plan anyway?
Is Daenerys even going to take the Iron Throne? I don't. Is she going to pause to go north and then never get it? Like the show. So, yeah, I'm on the keep it to a minimum, but it's definitely fair side of things. Keep an open mind with any of the examples that people try to throw out there, like this boar one. Like, I never really thought about that too much, but yeah, I don't know.
It could be. It's one of those things where it's a question you're supposed to ask because of his immense power, but just because you're asking a question doesn't always mean yes.
Yeah.
The one I think about the most and his influence on is definitely Howland Reed and the attorney at Harrenhal, because Howland was at the Isle of Faces for like a year, and then he strides out and he gets into the exact fight that leads to Lyanna noticing, that then leads to Rhaegar and her hooking up and all these other things. That's the one I'm most curious about, if Bloodraven had a hand in, if he actually saw the event and said, walk here, do this, say that, and it will make Jon Snow happen, basically. Because it's extremely it's a what's the right way to say this? It's extremely strange that he does walk out of the Isle of Faces, the place with all the weirwoods, and he does the exact thing that causes Rhaegar and Lyanna to find each other. It's how far down the road was he planning? I don't know, but it seems that Howland was sort of almost sent like a touch from Bloodraven into history, where he just wanted to press this point where he knew it would make the most difference.
Yeah, I agree, because it seems difficult. It seems like touching the past is hard for them, and it's not. It's like it takes energy or effort, or it's difficult, or even sketchy, if it's even possible at all, to certain extent. We know it's possible to some extent, but how much? So, and it seems he's very focused on Bran in general, like and other things lesser so. I mean, clearly affecting the election of the Lord Commander is something outside of Bran, but. Someone in the chat asked, why did he save Sam? Well, I think that's fairly straightforward, because right after Sam is saved, Cold Hands is like, hey, dude, open the Black Gate and get Bran out of the night fort.
Yeah, that was, he was just there to open the door.
Yeah, he's like, get me Bran, and then I don't care what happens to you after that. So, yeah, he goes in, he opens the door, the night fort, and then tells Bran, Cold Hands is waiting for you. He's like, ooh. It's like, the Ranger that's dead, that guy. You know who I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
I think the last one to pull from the chat, it was Vanessa Amnesty. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that last name right. Amnesty. I'm sorry, there's no N. She asked the question, what happened to Aegon the Fifth's sisters? And actually, this ties into something we were talking about earlier. Bloodraven has older sisters. So does Egg. Egg has older sisters. What happened to these women? I think, unfortunately, George kind of has a way of not liking to track matrilineal lines, where I think it's harder for him, because you really have to make up all these giant other family trees in order to explain them, whereas the patrilineal ones are much simpler: father, son, father, son, father, son. And yeah, I think that's the explanation, but I would definitely love to know what happened to the older Blackwood sisters, and definitely Aegon sisters.
Yeah, I agree, because we hear that, at least with one of Aegon's sisters, we hear that she was into magic a little bit. She was trying to give her brother potions. That may have just been a little girl thing, like not real magic, but it's still like a note about her, and you wonder what happened to that branch of the family, because we know they had at least one of them. Actually, I think both of them had kids, because
Aemon talks about the grandchildren, or the nephews and nieces, something like that.
Yeah. So that bloodline was out there somewhere.
Maybe this will be a plot point in I think there's some information that one of the Dunk and Egg stories will be with the Blackwoods and the Brackens at some point, like the Village Hero, I think it's called.
That's the one that's next. Yeah, that should be the one.
So if that's you said Melissa Blackwood, we may see Gwyneth and Mia too. They would probably be there, not at court, because most of Aegon's bastards did not stay at court.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the ones early, especially because there were factions that would have wanted them to leave, and if he doesn't care, he's not going to force them. He's like, yeah, I don't care if you make my bastard daughters leave. Sure, what do I care? I can't drink them or sleep with them, so
But that Bloodraven kid, make sure he stays at court. I don't care about the rest. The one who is very useful, he can stay.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's it for our questions. I gotta get going, because again, in about 55 minutes, I'm going on Radio Westeros talking about Melisandre. I picked Bloodraven particularly because of the crossover with Melisandre and the Melanie Seastar thing. These are all really interesting, but that's what we'll be talking about next. Aziz, plug away.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I will be checking out the stream with Radio Westeros. It sounds like a great topic, following up stuff that we talked about here and stuff that I talked about with them last week. It all just fuses together.
It's all one big tapestry.
It's very cool. So yeah, like you said at the beginning, we're doing Valar Regredis over on my channel. We're finishing A Storm of Swords on Sunday, and then moving on to A Feast for Crows, of course. And with quarantine, we're moving through it quickly. Not a lot of breaks scheduled in there. In fact, we have no break scheduled for A Feast for Crows. We're just going to go right through it. And We have a video on Serwyn of the Mirror Shield coming out in a few days. Well, that should be out for patrons. I guess it'll be out for public release probably about 10 days ish. And that's a little different than what our usual material is. Shorter, but it's also got some cool theories and ideas about what that character says about how many reflections he has on in the current time and recent history, like Barris Selmy and Kristen Cole and Eric and Arik, things like that. Then we are working on Blackwood Part 2. So that's kind of along these lines, talking about the Blackwoods and modern Blackwoods. And I know I'm forgetting something else.
Crusader
Kings streams Wednesday and Friday. God Emperor Daemon. Oh, and I've started a podcast on The Witcher. It has only 2 episodes so far. And that's with Kyle Foster and McCall Schick. And we're big fans of that series. It's really fun, really good. And if you're into it, check out the Podcast of Surprise.
There you go. All the many Aziz plugs. If you're still in the chat, stay till the end. This is weird to think about, but YouTube does care when people make it to the end of the video. I'm just going to do a few of them. Obviously, like I said, Radio Westeros in an hour. I'll put links for if you're watching us back or you're listening on the podcast. Like, share, subscribe to the channel. Also, the podcast feed is called The Wit and Wisdom of Joe Magician. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, all the places you want. Next video will be about Aegon, or young Griff, and how he's going to take Storm's End. That one is still coming. After that, looking more at the Faceless Men from the What's the True Value of Arya's Iron Coin. That was just the intro. I'm going to get more into the weirdness of the Faceless Men after that. And Quaranstreams continue Saturdays at 2 p.m. And my Crusader Kings 2 streams here on the channel and also on Twitch at twitch.tv/JoeMagician at Tuesdays at 7, right? You're on Wednesdays. I'm at Tuesdays. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Nailed it. All right. So that's all the things. Again, we got up to, I think, 250 people. Great showing. Yeah. I'm glad. It seems like you guys really enjoyed it. I'll be sure to talk about Bloodraven again in the future, especially as I struggle for what I will make these quarantine streams about. Clearly fertile ground. I don't have Valor or Redis. I'm just kind of making them up as I go. All right, so thanks everybody. Have a good time and have a good weekend, and I'll see you at 5.